everyone. Welcome to all 8 of you. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm here today. I'm Jennifer Baisley. I am the Coordinator of Collection Access and Acquisitions at Miami University in Ohio. And I'm here today with my colleague, Gael Bakay. She is the Director of the ISSN International Center. And as I hope you all know, we're here to talk about the Transfer Code of Practice and the Transfer Alerting Service. So we're really excited to be here because this is actually basically our 10-year anniversary for transfer. If you can believe it, it's been around for 10 years in some form or another. And coinciding with that 10-year anniversary, we have 2 significant changes that happened this year that you may already be aware of. The first is that we have started working on a new draft of the Transfer Code of Practice. So we were working under version 3, which was finished in 2014-2015. And this year we started working on version 4. So we'll talk about that and some of the revisions and updates that we're making to that. And then in conjunction with that release of version 4, we have also migrated the Transfer Alerting Service from the UKSG servers to the ISSN Center, which has been a really great collaboration. So, can you go to the next slide? So, we'll maybe go to the next slide. There it is. Okay. So today's session is we're going to speak to a couple of things. First, we'll talk about the Transfer Code of Practice, what it is, who writes it, who governs it, what its history is. We'll talk about some of the changes to version 4 of the code. And Gael will also show you the new Transfer Alerting Service, both the public-facing side for librarians and the publisher side through the ISSN portal, which is also new and improved. So I want to talk a little bit about what transfer is. So, libraries, publishers, vendors, all of us as participants in the information supply chain, we want the metadata that we offer our clients, whether that's patrons or librarians, to be accurate and up to date in our discovery services and in our services and software. And one of the pinch points in that process is often a journal transfer, when a journal moves from one publisher to another. And so the transfer code was created to provide all of us, the stakeholders in this chain, with basically best practices and guidelines to ensure that that transfer process goes smoothly and that our readers don't lose access to that material during the process. And we think that the guidelines have become increasingly important over the last 10 years because we've seen so much growth in online journal content, and the supply chain has grown to include more vendors, more publishers, and more intermediaries. So we think that this is more important than ever. So at its heart, transfer is a voluntary code. It's intended for journal publishers, and as I said, it contains best practices and guidelines. Publishers who register as transfer compliant publishers are asked to endorse the code, and this is not a formal process. It's done by email, and then we add their name to the list of transfer publishers on the site, and then we ask them to abide by those principles whenever they can reasonably do so. Transfer, as an overall thing, is governed by a standing committee, and that's created of librarians, publishers, and other intermediaries. And I'll talk a little bit more about the people who make up that committee in a moment. Some of the best practices within the code include things like formalized roles and responsibilities for both the receiving and the transferring publisher, suggested timelines for transfer actions and communications, depending on sort of when your transfer is happening during the year, suggestions for how to transfer different kinds of digital content, as well as subscriber lists, which is really important in that process. The use of the Transfer Alerting Service, which we'll talk about in more detail, and also some advice on licensing terms and preservation agreements with things like locks and clocks. To date, Transfer has upwards of 60 endorsing publishers, and that includes everything from large commercial publishers to small society publishers and everything in between. And while the oversight of the transfer code is basically the primary function of the transfer group, it's actually much more than that. So I mentioned that the Transfer Alerting Service is something that we oversee. And this group sort of maintains and develops the functions and features of that in collaboration with whoever is hosting the site with us, in this case, the ISSN Center. And additionally, transfer is about outreach and education. So sessions like these, where members of the group go out and talk to the community of stakeholders both to tell you what's going on and to get your feedback on how we can make the service better or the features better or the functionality better. Oh. So the transfer group, as I said, has reached, the transfer code has reached its 10-year milestone. The group has been around a little bit longer than that, since 2006. And we've gone through 3 iterations of the transfer code over the years, beginning in 2007. Some will say 2008. I couldn't find an exact date on that, so we're going to go ahead and say it's 10 years. We started out under the auspices of UKSG, which is the United Kingdom Serials Group. And in 2015, we moved under the auspices of NISO and became a NISO recommended practice, which is, and I have to say, both NISO and UKSG have been fantastic partners and have supported us in every way. And they've made all of this possible, so. You might see that there's a big gap in the timeline between 2009 and 2015, and I just want to assure you that we weren't doing nothing during those years. That was actually when we got the bulk of our endorsing publishers to come on board. So those were the years when the committee members were working on recruiting publishers, basically, telling them what it was about, sort of selling the transfer alerting service to them. And additionally, the transfer alerting service was developed in that period and has continued to evolve over time. So I want to talk a little bit about the transfer committee because they don't get a lot of recognition and they deserve it. So the transfer committee is a really diverse group. It has about 8 publishers, 5 librarians, and 6 intermediaries, and those folks rotate on and off depending on people's time and commitments, but that's the general mix. As I said, the publishers include everything from the big commercial publishers to society publishers, and we also have a lot of intermediaries represented. So that's both companies like EBSCO and Ex Libris, but also the ISSN International Center and Crossref. So we try to get a wide variety of sort of the stakeholders into this group. The members themselves come from diverse backgrounds, and the group is international, so we've got members from all over the world. And I think that lends us a nice variety of perspectives on the work that we're doing. The group is currently led by 2 co-chairs, one who is a librarian and one who is a publisher. And again, we think that helps with the perspective and keeping things balanced. We also have some subgroups of the committee. That would be librarians, publishers, and societies. And those subgroups work amongst themselves to create more targeted outreach and training opportunities for those specific stakeholders within their community. So the librarians work on library conference outreach, the societies talk amongst themselves to work on documentation, things like that. And I just want to say again that, thank you to the committee members. I don't know if any are here today besides Gail and I, but several of them are at Charleston. They've all worked really hard to revise the new draft of the code, as well as just market and outreach the transfer practice with publishers and librarians. So the new Code of Practice version 4, it basically seeks to address all the feedback we've gotten since the previous version was released in the very beginning of 2015. So that's a lot of feedback. It's 3 or 4 years worth. And the intent, of course, of any new version is just to make sure that we're addressing the current needs of the publishing community and setting out publisher responsibilities as clearly as we can. So some of the specific changes that we've made include things like updating terminology that relates to journal purchasing models, and that's especially true for purchasing models that may include some open access aspect. We've tried to clarify technology like URL redirects, because that's an area that's publishers have had a lot of questions on over the years. We've also updated clauses dealing with in-process articles, and that's because more and more publishers are using online editorial systems, and it's really important that if an article is in process when a transfer occurs, that in-process material also either remains with the publisher, the old publisher, or continues on to the new. So we've had some instances where things get lost in the cracks, and we want to make sure that all of the publications, from the very beginning of the process to the published work, make that transfer successfully. We've tried to use more inclusive language so that supplemental materials also make the transfer. So we're seeing more materials like data sets and videos and things that accompany an article And we need to make sure that those formats also go along with the articles in the transfer process. We've updated and expanded the glossary, and that takes into account changes in the journals market in general. We've tried to clarify some of the categories of paid customers. So it used to be that we only addressed subscribers, but we're trying to address other kinds of paid customers, so things like consortia, members of societies, that sort of thing. And finally, we've tried to clarify some perpetual access responsibilities, although that is a really hard can of worms to address, as you all know. We can create guidelines and recommendations, but at the end of the day, we can't really enforce them. So while we have clarified them, we can't enforce them. And as you may know, we had a public comment period on version 4 of the code that closed in late October. We'll be taking the feedback from that comment period and discussing it within the group, and hopefully making our last few revisions to the code. If you have any further feedback or suggestions, please do feel free to email me with that feedback if you missed the comment period. We haven't gone into the discussion phase yet, so we'd be happy to take it into account. And you can find a draft version of the code on the NISO transfer website, easily Googled. And if all goes well, we hope to make version 4 of the code the real thing in January of 2019, so fingers crossed. So I'm going to pass things over to Gael so that she can show you what the ISSN Center looks like online and talk a little bit about how we made that transition.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi. First of all, maybe it's useful for those of you who don't know the ISSN International Center just to introduce it in a few words. So the ISSN International Center is based in Paris, and it's an intergovernmental organization under the auspices of UNESCO and the French government. And we actually work with 90 ISSN national centers all over the world. And so, for example, you're aware that there is an ISSN center here in the US, which is based at the Library of Congress. There is one at the British Library, one at the National Library of France, also in Latin America, etc. So we work with colleagues all over the world, and of course our main purpose, our main task is to identify serials and serial publications in general by, in a way, identifying them through the assignment of ISSN and through also the gathering of metadata, basic metadata about this serial publication. And I'm sure you know that recently we've opened our portal, the ISSN portal, which is the free version of our main database, which is the ISSN register, but I will come to that a bit later. So actually what we were talking just before we started our formal presentation with Maria about how the ISSN International Center has got involved into in the process and finally offered to host the ETAS on its servers. I joined the group, that was 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And so through NISO, because I also work with NISO on a regular basis, because they are the secretariat to TC 46 Subcommittee 9, so they work with ISO. I also work with ISO because ISSN is an ISO standard. And so we know each other very well, and actually they mentioned this group, the transfer group, and saying, well, maybe that would be of interest to join. And we had also contacts before that, because there was, with the former ETAS service, which was hosted by the University of Manchester in the UK, we were in touch because they wanted us to deliver some information from the ISSN database for the ETAS. So actually that was not possible at that time because our database was not on the web at that time. So it was a bit complicated, you know, to just create a specific service for ETAS in Manchester. But that was made possible afterwards because we changed, you know, our service and opened the portal on the web. So it became easy. I mean, it became something feasible So that was also the reason why we had this discussion within the transfer group, and it was approved also because we had, you know, several discussions. There was a formal, let's say, approval from the transfer group to move the service from Manchester to Paris, which is not that far as a service from Manchester to Paris, for anyone, I would say.
Definitely.
So we started September 10th this year to provide the ETAS service on our website. So I will show you afterwards. There are two parts in a nutshell, just to know how it works. The first step, of course, is to sign the code of practice. So we only deal with publishers who actually have already signed the code of practice, and then we create their account on the ISSN portal. That's for free, and we deliver the password, the IDs, and then they can use this service to make the statement or to notify the community that, you know, a journal is going to change ownership. And then they feel, you know, on a regular basis when they buy a journal or they have an agreement with a society to publish a journal, then they connect to the register, to the portal, and they fill in a form. I will come to that later, to explain, you know, to give some details on the title which is being transferred. And then transfer information is distributed on the new ETAS application. So you have here the address, and that's also for free. So that's important because that was something we discussed. You know, ETAS service was provided for free by Manchester, by the University of Manchester. It was also important for the transfer group that this would be the same with the ISSN International Center. So this is the new platform for the transfer service, for the transfer analytics service, ETAS. So as you can see, we have, you know, NISO and the ISSN International Center, or ISSN, our logo being there, up there on the page. And actually this service is a database of information about journals that move from one publisher or vendor to another. This service actually is now live, and what you can see on this screen is that you have some information here, some background information about the service, and here you have the transfer notifications. Of course, we need to update the slide, but if you go to the website, you will see that the latest journal which was you know, notified dates from 2 days ago or something like that. There was a notification a few days ago. So if you're a librarian, actually, you can use this public part, I mean this public side of the database to get information on transfers. Okay, that's the one which is the most important to libraries. And we had this morning, we attended a presentation by colleagues from Rowan University, and they mentioned the service that they use to track transfers of journals. You can subscribe to the feed, and all in all, the functionalities are really similar to the one which were provided by the University of Manchester. You can also perform a search on the database. As you can see on the left-hand side, you can just, you know, put or key in, type the journal title or the ISSN, etc., and search. You can filter by date. When is the transfer? When will it happen? Or has it already happened? Or if you would, you know, you want to put a period to see between, I don't know, if you don't want to go every day or every month on the database, then you can search by a certain period of time. And the creation date, it's the time, I mean, it's the date when the publisher made the statement or the notification. So you can search both. You can adjust the number of results per page, and then you can also sort the results by dates or journal titles or transfer date, effective transfer date. And something I would like to mention also is that there can be, the results can be exported into CSV format, and you can use that in Excel afterwards. Another important thing, and you can see that here, is that in the results, the ISSN are hyperlinked, and when you click on that, you go to the portal, and you can see some more details on the title. And if you're a subscriber, or if your library is a subscriber, subscribes to the ISSN register, then you can see the full details on for each journal. So that's the browse view, so you can browse the results, so you can go to the portal, but depending on your rights or access rights, you can see more or less about the title. We also have implemented an API, so here it's public, so you have here the details of these APIs, so the idea being in that case that you can just ingest information from this database into your own system, if that's feasible also. And that's new. Actually, that's not, for the timing, there are not so many titles that have gone through successive transfers. So the idea being here to show which titles have passed from one owner or one publisher to another one, and so to track actually the history of the title and be able to go back in time and see, where was the publisher of this title. Well, after 2009, we don't go back to the 70s or the 80s, but when the ETAS service was created, it was in 2009, so we go back to this date, and we show these titles which actually changed ownership. And another new feature are statistics. This is one example. Actually, it shows that Taylor and Francis, on a certain period of time, or since the beginning, since the inception of the database, has bought 494 journals. Okay. Then the second one is Sage. Oh, here, Sage Publishing. So that's the one we have to that's an issue. We have to merge these two. And Wiley Blackwell, okay, with 123 journals acquired. I want to mention this issue for Sage and Sage Publishing. Actually, in the former database, there was no canonical way of specifying the publisher, because actually each publisher would just enter its own data, and sometimes it was Sage, sometimes it was Sage Publishing. So we want to work with Jennifer and James and the transfer group to actually come up with only one way to identify the publisher, and that should be when we agree on a specific way to identify the publisher, then we will merge that, and we will only have one canonical title for a publisher. Okay, so that's the public. That was the public side. That was that's the ETAS database is the one that you will use the most, and that is the most useful also for you. Now let's go to the other side of the service, which is based on the new portal. I mentioned the fact that the ISSN portal was launched on the web beginning of January this year, and so it made easy. It was more easy on this basis to start developing our service for publishers, for them to notify transfers, and the idea being that they can register through ID and password, and they have their own account, because I would like to mention the fact that the ISSN International Center actually deals with publishers based in countries where there is no ISSN National Center, I mean for ISSN assignment, okay? These publishers, Wiley, Sage, etc., they don't deal with the ISSN International Center when they request ISSN, okay? They go to the US Center, to the UK Center, or to the Netherlands. So it's a bit, I mean, although it's based on the same features, on the same functionality, the publishers, I mean, Wiley or Taylor and Francis, they have their own ID and password, they can connect, but they don't have all the same, you know, services. They only have services which are related to transfer, okay? So, although it's the same interface, let's say, they don't have the possibility to request an ISSN, okay? Because we don't deal with them on a regular basis. They go to the US ISSN Center. But it was more convenient to create accounts for these transfer publishers. So we used the same interface, and what they can do is claim a resource. So they have the same interface, but the only functionality they can use is claim a resource. So when they do that, they perform a search on the portal, on the ISSN portal. They identify the title that they want to actually notify is now under their responsibility. And so this one is ontology studies, and then they click on declare a transfer. Okay, so when they do that, oh, that's very fuzzy. They land on a form where they actually have to fill in a few, you know, data, or give a few data or information related to the publication itself. So they have to specify the preceding publisher, the date of the transfer, the URL, and also they have to upload some document. That's not compulsory, but that was something actually we decided to set up, or to request, because sometimes publishers, you know, they have agreements, so they can upload an agreement or a contract or whatever, or, you know, a title page, or you know, a layout, how the title page will look when the transfer is effective. So that was the idea behind that. That was. Do you want to ask a question now?
I was just going to ask a question.
Okay.
Do the publishers have any obligation to declare a transfer in a given period of time? Is it something that has happened in the past, or is it something that's going to happen in the future?
Well, actually, when I looked at the journal transfer today, the other one, the public interface, I saw that there were some. A publisher made a notification for a transfer transfer which had already happened.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's better if you, of course, it's better if everybody knows about the transfer in advance. But I saw today that that had been done by publishers. That it can also, I mean, it's a load. They can do that.
To be transfer compliant, do they have to do it before, or does it matter?
It's recommended,
Yeah.
Okay.
but again, we can't enforce it. So the recommended guideline is, I think, 3 to 4 months before the transfer happens.
If a new publisher endorses transfer, could they potentially though give you back records? You know, does it have to just be from this point forward, from when they sign it, or could they give you historical records of transfers that they have on file?
We have not seen the case actually. We have not.
No.
So that would be something we would need to figure out with the publisher. But I think that would be of interest for everyone.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So I think we would just find a way to upload this information in in the register, in the
Because
ISSN
you
portal.
made the comment that you only have the records back to when
Yeah.
it started.
Yeah,
But, I mean, there's interest and need
Yeah.
for having records, at least, and I mean, I might be in the minority here, but at least back to when the electronic version started.
Yeah.
It's a little easier to track things with the print, but it becomes a lot more difficult tracking those transfers for the electronic versions.
Yeah.
well, yeah, that's interesting, but at the moment, it's not in the code of practice. I mean, because maybe that would be better to include that in the code of practice, just to give also the possibility, because I'm not sure publishers are aware that this possibility could be of interest to the community.
Yeah, we've never advertised it, but we could certainly talk about doing it. And we have also talked in the past about leveraging the API to perhaps use that in conjunction with OCLC data on serial records to sort of trace a title change. But that's been something that's required a level of technology expertise that we haven't really had. But that is still something that's on our list of things to look at.
So for every title at the moment, the receiving publisher has to fill in this form for every title. We don't have a bulk, a way to deal with several titles. Anyway, I'm not sure it happens very often that, one publisher, or that would be in case a big publisher buys another big publisher, and then of course we would have to, but it's a bit different. So for the time being, it's title by title, but if that's something which is requested by publishers, we could also work on, uploading several ISSN, uploading information on the previous publisher, on the former publisher also. But for the time being, that's not the case, okay? It's title by title, and they have to fill in this, yeah. And then what happens in the ISSN portal, in the database, we have this transfer logo that appears on the record. We have also more information about the receiving publisher here. The current publisher is here, and the receiving publisher is mentioned also on the record. So that's something interesting, because we can do that in the portal, because that's we can deal with information for future events, which is a problem, because in the ISSN register itself, in the database where we have all the ISSN, etc., in Mark 21 format, we don't have this information for what is going to happen with the title. I mean, we don't deal with that. We deal with current information. I mean, when you see the document, then you just enter information, and that's different on the portal. We can just add information on things which are going to happen. And this information is also passed on to the ETAS. So this is available for our subscribers, the customers of the ISSN portal, and also on the ETAS for free. Okay, so we duplicate the information, but anyway, it's important to have it in both places. And something I forgot to mention is that when a publisher fills in the form and makes a statement about a transfer, the ISSN International Center, the librarians who work there, actually validate the request. So they have a look at it. They can just also reject it because there's some information missing, lacking. So there is a control. There is a human control on the form and on the information which is provided by the publisher. And then when it's validated, it appears in the ETAS database, and it appears in the portal. So I don't know whether you have questions. Maybe.
We just wanted to point you to a couple of links. Obviously, you can Google NISO transfer, and that's quite easy. But NISO changed their URLs a year or two ago, so you may need to update your bookmarks. There's a page just for transfer. There's also a page for the notifications, so that includes the RSS feeds in the email listserv. And then we've also got a link to both the slides and the recorded webinar that the ISSN Center did for publishers that sort of shows them how to use the new portal. And you can find all of that information on the transfer publisher list. Those links to the recording are at the top of that page.
And yeah, the webinar is more detailed on the whole process. So I think it's important for people who want to go into detail to have a look at it.
Yeah, definitely.
So there are both slides and also the recording.
Yes, yeah. Questions?
Actually, it was interesting because when I saw the road symbol up there, it made me think of something that would, because I dealt with this recently, but something that would be helpful in the transfer information is when an open access publication transfers publishers, to indicate whether or not the open access policies will remain the same or if there's any changes to the policies when it goes from one publisher to the other. That isn't always clearly indicated anywhere.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we're trying to address in the next version of the code as well. And we're also trying to encourage more open access publishers to endorse. We've got a handful already, including Hindawi, but there are obviously many more, so yeah. And that question is even more complicated for hybrid journal support,
Well, it gets more complicated with embargoed open access. That makes it even harder to track it down.
I have two questions. What is the benefit to publishers to use this service? And who's the responsible party, the one receiving the journal or letting the journal go?
The receiving publisher, that's the publisher that we recommend enters the information since they're getting the content. As far as the benefit to publishers, we usually just tell people that, the benefit is that it presents a set of guidelines for a workflow that you may not have any processes or procedures in place for. A lot of publishers we've worked with, especially smaller ones, they don't necessarily understand how disruptive the transfers are, and they don't always remember all of the different parties that have to be notified and all of the details. So basically we just, we think it's a great descriptive set of guidelines that helps you to remember all of the bits and pieces that often fall through the cracks otherwise.
Like, I wondered if it reduced support to their end users or their subscribers by providing this information in advance. Like, does it alleviate any of the service calls they get or the claims they have? Or
That's interesting. I'm not certain, actually. That's something we've never looked at, but it would be interesting to know. I like to think that it does alleviate some of those.
I would think so too. I just wondered if there was if there was a proven measure that publishers who participate in this, the end result or the positive result is this.
That's a great question, and that's something that we could certainly look at, actually.
I work for a publisher. I could just comment that we've gone through transfers where the transferring publisher really drags their feet on providing subscriber information. So then it's so difficult to try to track down which libraries have entitlements, what they own. So it's wonderful to have just a really clear expectation that, we're all in this together and journals move around and you should always be a good citizen.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh wait, there's one behind you, actually.
Colleen Finley, I work with Wiley, and part of my job is to help make sure that our Google Scholar links are working, where the whole article redirects start linking.
Yeah.
One of the things we're seeing is situations where the former publisher, for contractual reasons, needs to keep content up, as well as the new publisher, whichever side you're on.
Right.
Which really starts to play to problems with, you can't do article-to-article with redirects because it's still staying on the old side. Have you guys come up with any recommendations in that kind of situation?
We have not. We've gone back and forth on the redirect issue, from being very vague to very specific to very vague because of these kinds of situations. Right, where sometimes the content remains on two sites and other times it completely transfers. We don't have a specific recommendation for that, but we will definitely add it to the list of things. Can you add that to the list of things that we should
I've worked with Google Scholar now
Yeah.
for probably since 2004, and it's
Yeah,
it's always a really complex situation of trying to get in Scholar, they only provide a primary link. So
right.
ideally, if you're the new publisher, you want that primary link position.
Right. We have talked about that being part of the sort of contractual
Yeah.
agreement between the transferring and the receiving publishers. I'm not sure if it's something that we could, we could certainly suggest something, but we can't prescribe anything. So,
Thank you.
sure. Oh, sure.
I wonder if you wouldn't mind me asking. So there was another situation we had where a journal moved from a quite small publisher. I work for Duke University Press. My name's Leslie, and it was it was all in good faith. But that small publisher had very poor records about past historical subscribers, and so we struggled with how to define the perpetual access entitlements going forward. So I wonder, have you ever had the experience of a new publisher contacting you and asking you to self-report on the things that you own for that journal? It would be a huge undertaking, but there weren't a lot of great solutions.
Oh, you mean where a library's asked to?
Yeah, a publisher going to the libraries who maybe are current subscribers and saying, we
Right.
know you're current, how many years have you subscribed to, which years?
Yeah, I've never been proactively asked, but I've certainly had to give that information.
Was that hard to track down? Is that a pretty burdensome request?
It varies from library to library, and
Mhm.
it just all depends on when you started subscribing and who was taking, who was keeping documentation. But it can be, especially with that whole, when did it go from print to electronic? That's not something that was always tracked very well in the 90s.
Yeah.
So.
Have you thought about talking to the agents?
Yeah, it's a mistake.
I
Yeah.
work-
Yeah, that's a really good
I work
idea.
with WT-COM, so yeah. I mean, because we have a lot
have
of
the
those
records.
records. Yeah, and it depends on how long they've been a customer with us.
Mhm.
But,
That would
even
help,
you
yeah.
could talk,
Mhm.
a lot of times we may know who their previous agent was.
Mhm.
And we can tell you, we have records back to this far, and you need to go talk to Harassowitz for anything before this, or whoever, the agents could help with a lot of that probably.
That's
Yeah.
cute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time. We are out of time, actually. So if there are any other questions, we're
Barry,
welcome.
you had a question?
It was just real quick, if we notice a transfer that wasn't reported,
Mhm.
who do we report that to? The publisher or ETAS?
You can report it to myself or
Okay.
James Philpotts,
Yeah,
who are the
because
co-chairs.
you need an account to be able to do it
Yeah.
for ITAS.
Yeah.
I guess basically we want to request that the transfer, they get.
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
refer
Because
to
I
us, that's
go
great.
there first
Yeah.
for all transfer information. That's like
Yeah.
my go-to.
Yeah, that's, if you can report it to us, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.